Hello, everyone. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and welcome to the Leadership Exchange. This is the start of our second season, Lupe. Just want to give a shout out and recognize that, we've got more listeners than we thought beyond our families. We were able to see 1,000 downloads happen, I believe, in the month of January. So, exciting to see that, there's folks that are enjoying the podcast and listening to it, and hopefully we continue to get better over time.
We appreciate everyone's support. Those that are listeners, especially those of you that are regular listeners, we really appreciate and are very grateful for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lupe, season 2 is going to move us in a little bit of a different direction, still with the main focus on, things that we would have liked to have known maybe earlier in our careers, or things that we've learned at key times in our career that we want to share with other leaders that are, starting their journey, or just as a reminder, some folks too that are, experienced leaders as well. And so, why don't you start off a little bit with a story that will kind of set the framework for this season's podcasts?
I can do that. Yeah, especially for such a special moment as the start of our second season. A team I was part of, we accomplished a lot of great things. Some of the things we talked about in the past here, Steve, some of the practices, some of the things that we're trying to share with everyone. I did those things, and I was able to the leaders of the team and the team to get on board with trying all these different things. And we had immense success, especially around the things that we're going to talk about for season 2. We're really going to build on the topic of leadership, but it was a bit of a heartbreak for me because several years later, probably more than 10 years later, I went back to the same organization, the same team to visit. And I was very shocked at how things had been lost. Some of the things that we did, some of the great things that were in place had fizzled out. It really got me thinking about what could have happened. What leads that? Were the ideas that bad? Were they just not effective? I mean, there was a good multi-year run where those improvements and those things that we were doing were sticking and being very successful. And a lot of other sites would come to see the things that we were doing because they were so positive, so good, and effective at allowing us to be a high performing work team and having, operational success, performing against our budget, performing against our safety or quality metrics. It was just one of those magical moments where we had a really, really great team that was performing on the business level and cultural level. Steve, you know that this kind of topic you and I have talked about, and I've shared this story with you, and it really brought to light, I think, the topic of season 2, specifically what we're introducing everyone today. It's around, I believe, what I witnessed when I went back there, what had to do with not having solid leadership standard work in place to sustain those improvements. Not to say that the leaders that were there didn't want it, but I think, you've got to really think of these things on a big scale when it comes to succession of leaders. So when I left, I was a site leader. How did the person that replaced my role perceive those improvements, and did they have the standard work that I had to ensure that those things were continuing? Right? Some of those good things. Now, there might be changes. That change is always good if you're doing it for the right reasons, but you still have to have some understanding of it and the importance of what you as a leader, how you can influence it. So I feel like after multiple leaders, not only at the site leader level, but throughout that organization, they moved away from these things. And some of the great things, I mean, the work areas were dirty. There just was a lot of things that were happening. There was a lot of 5S that had happened. That was they were like the poster child of 5S in some areas, and all of that had gone away. This topic of, hey, leader standard work and how critical it is to sustaining these things is important. And that's what we're going to talk about in season 2. We're going to really pick it apart. But today we're going to really just talk about kind of the introduction of it.
I appreciate the opportunity to share some of that experience with you. And, you and I've had several conversations about, okay, I wonder what happened, what still existed, which I think was, a positive spin on it. There were some things that, had been put into place that, had carried on and, not being connected to the organization or the site. There's not much we can do to really go in and problem solve, but I think, it would be interesting. We've heard another example of something similar from a big cargo carrier logistics company that went through a similar experience. As we were talking to the folks that were the points of contact that I believe you and another one of our colleagues have, their team that was really the champions of bringing cultural improvement and the servant leadership practices to that organization, and benefiting and seeing all the positive results at that time. Also saw that where it eroded over time was around leader standard work. And I think it's important for any leader to understand that if it really requires you to be there for things to continue to happen in a certain way, then you really have not been able to transfer enough of the systems that are needed. And that's, I think, a lesson that, we both have learned through our careers is that's easy to happen. I'll share an example of a management system in defense contracting world I was in, where I was sent over again to a location that I had some familiarity with from a couple years previous. And I went in and talked to the program manager. I was probably the third person from corporate that was sent over. And so I had a good relationship with him. So I came in, asked him how he was doing, and he said he wasn't doing well at all. The sky was basically falling on this contract. And he goes, and I don't really have time for you now, Steve. I hope you appreciate the pressure that I'm under. I respect, the fact that you've come all the way over here to try and help me, but I'm positive there's not anything you could do right now that would be more important than what I'm trying to do. And so I thanked him and I said, hey, I understand completely. I'll come back and check in with you the next day, but give me an idea of what it is that you're up against. He communicated to me that he owed a report to the customer of the status of every vehicle in the shop. And this was a large equipment repair center with, multiple buildings and teams, everything from light wheel to track equipment. And so there's just a lot, hundreds of pieces of equipment. He was brought in because the previous individual had really kind of failed to, deliver on time service, getting those vehicles back out. And so he was really in a hard place. What was interesting to me as I walked out there was I thought, well, we created a report 2 years ago that would give that status. And so, being familiar with the team there still, I went to the place where that report was maintained. And I asked them, and we called it the Green Report. And I said, hey, I'm curious, do you guys still have a copy of the Green Report? And the two guys that were there just smiled ear to ear. Yes, yes, Steve, we're still keeping the Green Report. And I said, outstanding. I said, and your confidence accurate? And they go, absolutely. So then I'm starting to think the Green Report status is every vehicle. And it was really a stoplight report of, red, yellow, green, depending on where the vehicle was at and what it needed in terms of repair and the expected delivery schedule. And we call it the Green Report because the goal was, let's try to get everything colored to green. They were excited. I said, hey, print it out for me and let me take a look at it. And so they printed it and I looked at it and I thought it had current dates. I went and checked a couple of the shops to see if it had the actual vehicle with the serial number so that I knew that what they were tracking was still accurate. And I went back and I said, hey, who sees this report now? Who do you give this report to? And they said, well, 2 years ago, or I guess 3 years ago, we created it. After a year, program leadership had changed out, and the new program manager came in, decided he knew more than the previous person, and they didn't have a good handoff. And so he really didn't know what systems were out there, what information was available to him. And, one of the reasons why he had failed. So I just started smiling. I said, "Hey, print me another copy. And whatever you do, don't stop producing this report. It's going to have a lot of value." And so then I went back up to the program manager's office who was there, and I said, Hey, Scott, I think I got something you want to see. And he was still distressed. He was irritated at me. And he's like, "What is it that you have that I want to see that's so important right now? Because I really don't have time for you." And I said, "I've got the status of all the vehicles in the shops."
Boom.
Yeah. After some, you know, I don't want to say shock, but that's probably the best way to describe it. And disbelief. He goes, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I've got the status of all the vehicles in the shop." And I laid it on his desk, and he started looking at it. Honest to God, Lupe, tears started to form in his eyes as he was looking at this. He goes, "Where did you get this? How come you know about this and I don't?" And I said, "Hey, let's not focus on that.
You saved his bacon, Steve. Big time.
Yeah, let's just focus on here's what you need, and then we'll talk about where it's at and kind of what happened."
That's amazing. That's amazing. You just triggered. I just remembered something that didn't happen that long ago, but there are kaizens that I've seen where the team goes. So they've implemented something, a process, let's say, and they've made these improvements, and everyone's happy and everyone's celebrating. Multiple leaders later, they're doing the same thing again for the same process. All of those, not all, but many of the same opportunities that existed, let's say 4 years ago, exist again. And so they have another Kaizen, and they identify many of the same opportunities. I'm going to say like 90% of the same opportunities as were corrected 4 or 5 years prior. And they're celebrating. And again, it's like this cycle of we're not sustaining the things that we've improved. And I think that is why, similar to your example, there's probably a little more in your example around, hey, how does one leader pass on information to the next leader, right? That can be part of the opportunity. But I think the key here for me is that as leaders, we have to do a real good job at transitioning to the next leadership team with the knowledge base of the improvements and the I'm going to introduce the word of system, which we're going to use a lot in this next season. We're going to refer to systems. If you don't understand the systems that are in place as a leader, it's really hard for you to continue to support the sustainment of those things, right? And so I think there's probably a gap in how leaders pass the baton to other leaders, and it's really starting to make me think that there's probably yet another episode, Steve, out there for us to really talk about how that works, because I do feel that that's probably part of the opportunity in some of these examples.
Yeah, I agree, Lupe. And I think, we talked about defining a system, before the podcast started here. And I think it's important to share that with everybody so that they understand what we're referring to in our application here of system related to leadership standard work. So do you want to give everybody the short definition there?
Yeah, the definition that we've kind of gravitated to, and there's a lot of definitions out there, but this is the best one we could find for what we're trying to talk about. And this is by one of our favorite guys out there, Edward Deming. He says a system is a network of interdependent components that work together to try to accomplish the aim of the system. The aim of the system must be clear to everyone in the system. To me, the big things here is it's a network of interdependent components that work together. So you're trying to accomplish something. A lot of different things will be part of that system. Think of like a biological system or like your cardiovascular system, right? There's a lot of pieces to it, but they all have a purpose, right? Nervous system. So lots of things that go into the mix, but they have one purpose together that they're trying to accomplish.
A good way to describe it, and kind of going back to, the concept of systems that support, leader standard work or leadership standard work. A lot of times those aren't really well defined, right? And I think, as we've both seen, if there's not a good process for either handing off those systems, or a lot of times, a leader may leave with 2 week notice, right? And next guy comes in, or gal, and they just don't have an understanding of what's there. And so I think, from any leader that's either new to the role or going in, ask those questions. Hey, what systems are already there that are going to help me with this job role that I have, and really start to take an inventory, because you're going to find probably there are many things in place, like the green report that I was referring to, or other things out there. So you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. You can improve the standard. And I like the fact that you talked about an example where, Kaizen was conducted to, address some issues that a location was having. And, what they recognized, after going through the exercises, there were several improvements. But for those people that maybe were located at the project in the past, they recognize, hey, those were some things we had in place already. So to me, it's more problem solving maybe than a Kaizen event. That's just a little bit of, I guess, how I would play on words. The activity is very Kaizen like, but I think, it's really problem solving, because you want to go back and understand, hey, what happened where the systems stopped working, or something kind of, fell apart. And so I think in any case, really, being a good detective as you come into these roles to kind of figure out, okay, what's existing already, and starting to piece together bits of information can save you a lot of anxiety and angst, as you start to learn what is out there. Hopefully people are coming into those leadership roles where your company is going to give you that opportunity to learn, right? They don't expect you to go from 0 to 100 in that new role. And so good companies know that they've got to be able to bring you into the fold, and then start to see you progress, as you learn new things. I think the one area that a lot of places that I've either worked in or seen struggle is really leader standard work. There's a lot of standard work in some of the organizations I've been with at the I would say the work floor level, but when it gets into leadership, that's really an area that we're going to focus this season 2 on, is the types of systems that are part of that leadership standard work, and kind of how they interact. Lupe, give me an example real quick of kind of some of the basics or the base systems that you think are necessary for leader standard work in some of the areas that we're going to talk about.
Well, I'm going to limit it to 2, because there really is there is a myriad of systems you could focus on. If you were to do 2 systems to really focus on, and that I think, or I'm going to say 3 systems that will really deliver like great results. Sort of the bang for the buck is the highest, and they can also set up the other systems. But 3 systems that we're going to focus on are the business management system. So that's the system of how you do your work, whatever it is, whether you're a warehouse operation, whether you're a financial institute. You have business that needs to happen every day, every 12 hours, whatever. How do you manage that system? And then there's the continuous improvement system. So how do we continuously improve? And then lastly, but definitely not lastly or leastly, is the people systems. To add a little bit more to help people understand systems. So when we talk about system, we're really talking about everything having to do with it. We're talking about the processes involved. We're talking about tools, methods, the inputs and the outputs, the environment, and feedback loops, and then standards involved with that particular thing. Another piece to really understand that's critical is that systems are what drive behaviors. If you can understand that connection of like, wait a minute, how do these systems drive behaviors? Because it's almost like you are, the team can be the product of their environment. So if you create that right environment, you have the right tools, you have the right processes, you have good standards, clear standards, and there are great methods that have been proven, then you should have great results. Those behaviors are driven by the system that you create as the leader. And or the higher you are in responsibility as a leader, right? Whether you're vice president, a director, senior manager, you're going to have more influence in creating this than, let's say, the supervisor or a line captain or a lead on the floor. They still definitely have an impact, but the bigger your scope of responsibility, your sphere of influence, the more impactful you can be about doing that. And then sustainment, Steve. When you think of what we're talking about when it comes to sustainment, sustaining things, what are the things that come to your mind?
So part of it, Lupe, is really having something that has clarity to it, right? So in some cases, it's being able to document the process. So you can reflect on it as a standard, but then you can also share it. So it becomes a tool that allows you to continually improve as you're in that role, but also to start sharing with others in the organization, so that as you're bringing up that next leader, right, they can start learning about systems thinking, which I think is really critical to the sustainment piece. And I think the other side of sustainment is you got to find the simplicity in things, right? So complexity really can make it difficult for the system to, be maintained over time or sustained over time. So, where you can simplify things, and then you got to really be open to sharing it, right? So as a leader, if you're not willing to share your leader standard work or talk to other leaders in the organization about how you look at things or how you take on specific tasks, chance of you being able to see sustainment in people that either come into the organization after you, that you've kind of groomed into those positions or hired in, that likelihood goes down quite a bit. So I think simple written standard work from a leadership perspective can help us all. And I reflect, I've got a really short list and I try to keep it very simplified. So the things that I look at on a regular basis are, okay, what are the strategic initiatives that we have as an organization? How do those fall into, the operating plans that we set with the team? What are the frequency that we're going back looking at those operating plans with the teams, and what are the measurements that we're getting that say that we're either on track or not on track, and then how are we communicating that? How are we sharing that both internally to the team and then externally, within the organization? So that's one example, I think, of how I look at leader standard work, and one of the systems that I know is important for the work that I do. How about you, Lupe? You want to give us a couple examples?
Maybe not examples, but I would say that when you're talking about sustainment, the two things that I like to kind of think about is like, hey, what is it exactly that we're trying to sustain, right? I feel like there's two pieces to that. One is we want to sustain the performance and improvement in performance that we are achieving. Secondly, we need to sustain the culture that we are currently having or that we're heading towards, right? You don't want to go backwards in any one of those things where like, hey, we're doing well in performance, but now we're really suffering in performance, or hey, our culture used to be good, but now our culture's not very good. So sustaining those two very key aspects, I think, are critical. When I think of sustainment, I'm seeing it in those two dimensions.
Yeah, and some of the sources or resources that we use, Lupe, and we've aligned with, because the things that we've seen work, and just the connectivity between the systems and the tools and the culture that creating that environment for these things to work, follow a lot of the principles of the shingle model. And so folks on the podcast that are listening, that are familiar with the shingle model, we'll be referencing that quite a bit as well. And so some of the details that we'll be working through and talking about can be found there. But that's one model, right? That's one system. We like it and are aligned to it, but we've also got some other information that we've learned that from a system standpoint, and then I think from a sustainment standpoint, will be really practical experience or application examples. Along with, hopefully we'll have some good guests coming in season 2 here as well. I know that we've got 4 or 5 people right now that have expressed an interest and lined up, and we'll visit with some other leaders and kind of get their input on these things as well. Lupe, anything else you want to cover today before we start to wind it down?
No, I think we've kind of set the second season up. Hopefully everybody is looking forward to some of this discussion. But I think for now, I think we call it a day, Steve.
Sounds good. So thank you, everybody. Again, really appreciate folks that started with us in season 1 and those that are staying on now that we're heading into season 2, and really excited about some of the things we're going to share. And again, we love your feedback. Please continue to, message us. Lupe, you want to give folks the best way to get a hold of us?
Yeah, I think probably Instagram or Threads. You can find us on either one as Leadership Exchange. You should not have a problem finding us there. We look forward to everyone's feedback and look forward to talking to you in our next episode when we really start to break the topic of leadership standard work within the context of the 3 systems we talked about: business management system, CI system, and people systems. So really looking forward to it. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon. And thank you. This is the Leadership Exchange.
Have a great day.